It's the 12th day of February, and good morning to you. If you've joined us, you are on the fifth connection, and we are happy that you are here as we continue to talk through a slice of the story in the book of Hebrews that is filled with enigma, very enigmatic section, very mysterious, and all that goes with it. And it's about a very interesting character. We either say too much about this character or we say too little about this character. And we have more questions than we have answers. Because when it comes to names and naming, uh, they are very important rituals that we follow. In different traditions, you have different rituals that accompany a naming ceremony, or as we call it, a christening, giving that child their name. Uh, the name Gawain, of course, is of Irish origin, and it means rough or barbaric. It's a masculine name reserved for a child, for a boy, who's unafraid to forge his own path, come hell or high water. And this title derives from the Irish surname, which is anglicized as Garvey, from Garb, meaning rough or barbaric. And this title was given to the ancient clans who bore it because an embrace of this title had to do with someone who was rambunctious, a very outgoing, knock down, drag out kind of warrior spirit. So it was either the embrace of the character of the one who bore the name, or it was a title honoring their ancestry. In African culture, we're not far off on this either because names in Africa have very significant meaning. The name Tabo, for example. Of course, if you come at it with a very British accent, then you'd say Tabo. But it's Tabo. And it's a male and female African given name. And it is short for Letabo, meaning happiness or joy. It's very common in South Africa for a name that is given to both men and women. So names reflect character, they reflect honor. Why do you think the renaming of roads in South Africa has become such a point of contention? Because names reflect something. And so in the book of Hebrews, from chapter 5 to chapter 7, you have a name that appears some 6 times from chapter 5 to chapter 7. And it's not the kind of name you want to give your kid. It's the name Melchizedek. Melchizedek. Now, what's in a name? We're going to look at this name as it appears in Hebrews and in other texts of Scripture, the Old Testament in particular. We're going to look at what's in a name because I've entitled this morning's block, Cryptic King. And this is the first installment, Cryptic King. Because there's something in this name. There's something about this individual that is very significant. And this area of study or reading raises more questions than we have answers for. Every step of the way, when you track this personage, this person, this name, you come up with more questions and more questions and more questions, which makes him this person quite a mysterious individual. As quickly as he appears, he disappears off of the horizon of the biblical story. And so I'm going to track very slowly through this info. It's If you're not a reader, you won't pick this stuff up because it's buried in different texts and many different articles written by different students of the scriptures. And so I'm going to interact some with that because it has a very important bearing on the book of Hebrews and in the book of Hebrews because of what the Christian Hebrews were wrestling with. Remember, they came out of Judaism, they came out of uh, the Ur of the Chaldees. Their forefather did, Abram. And he tracks from Ur of the Chaldees and he works his way very adventurously into what was then called the land of Canaan. For him, it would be the promised land. My. Big promises were made to him, but he had to take up the challenge of being uh, quite adventurous in launching out and tracking with this God who called him, the God of the Hebrew scriptures. And so this morning we're going to look at this cryptic king and just one aspect of who this king is. We're going to look at the name Melchizedek. Melchizedek comes up in chapter 5 of Hebrews for the first time and appears some 6 times across 5 to 7 of those chapters. So we're going to track back, just go back a bit, get to the book of Hebrews and take a sharp left and go all the way into the Old Testament to the very first book of the Bible. Go to the very first book of the Old Testament, the book of Genesis. Because in that book, you have a man with a very important name, Abram, father of nations, Abraham. And God calls him from the Chaldees. And of course, God calls him out of paganism, from amongst sun worshippers in the Fertile Crescent. And Abram takes the challenge to go with God. And so you have in chapter 40 now, God has called him and he's taken this journey of this great adventure of going into a land he did not know. Number one, he did not know the land. He didn't know where it was. And he didn't know how to get there. And so God directs him, first of all, to a place called Haran. And it's in Haran that Terah dies. Terah is Abram's father because he has to deal with daddy issues and family issues as well. Because good old Lot is trucking with him as well. And it's in the land that Abram has these encounters, not only with God, but with different family members at different points. And so he's in the land and he has just come back from a great victory in which he has, of course, rescued some very important people. He's done battle with a number of kings in chapter 14 and he rescues good old Lot. Of course, takes a lot of Abram's patience, no pun intended. And Abram comes back. And so in chapter 14, verse number 17, the text says, after his return, that's Abram's return from the defeat of Kedorlaomer and the kings who were with him, the king of Sodom went out to meet him in the valley of Shaveh, that is the king's valley. And verse 18, Melchizedek, king of Salem, brought out bread and wine. He was priest of God Most High. Here you have this character appear, Melchizedek. And the name of this king means king of righteousness. And we're going to go into that a bit. But there's just one verse here which talks about this king, Melchizedek. Now, of course, reams and reams and reams of paper and black ink on white paper has been spilt on the identity of this king. And I don't profess to be exhaustive over the next couple of sessions with this, but I need to just pique your curiosity in terms of this character. Because as our faces differ, so viewpoints and opinions have differed over the years and across the centuries in terms of IDing this king. And so Melchizedek is a name. But now we have to do some work here. Is this a descriptor of who the king is, or is it a title of someone, an honorific title, or as we would say, a theophoric reference of a man who happens to be a king? Is it adjectival, descriptive of someone, or is it nominal? It's an honorific title. My king is righteous. It could go both ways. So that's where I want to start. Because if you think of what's in a name, oh, there's a lot in a name. Think about your name. Where did mommy or daddy or the person who gave you your name, where did they get this name from? What does this name mean? And why did they give it to you? We've always joked over the years over my name because someone suggested that they gave you the name Terrence because you were a terror of a child. I was nothing short of that. Absolute terror. And always joked about it. Yeah, some of that still sticks. So the name you've been given is significant. Are you living up to that name? Here's a king who appears, Melchizedek. And I take it that the name is theophoric. The name is a descriptor of somebody who's king. Think of the name Apollonius. It's a theophoric name. It's the name that is embedded in a descriptive nominal title, if you will, given to somebody, and buried in that name is this word Apollo. Apollo is a deity, it's a god. Think of the name Theophilus. My friend Theo sits in Sweden and is often on radio with me. And his name means the one bearing God, or the one carrying God. What a fantastic name. Happens to be the name of the one in the book of Acts. Dr. Luke writes to Theophilus, the bearer or the carrier of a God. What a name. So the word is embedded in the person's name, right? The word God is embedded in that name. Thelonious, Theophilus. We have many names like that. Now you need to remember that Brother Abe is in the land of Canaan. This is way before Joshua conquers the land through his military campaigns. Remember when Joshua crosses the Jordan? He embarks on a military campaign, and the first city that is taken is Jericho. He goes for the kill, and he cuts off the north from the south by taking Jericho. He splits Canaan, in a sense, into north and south, and they take the north partially by military force and the south totally. Of course, 10 tribes go to the north and 2 tribes of Israel go to the south. But this is way before that. The land is still under Canaanite domination. And Canaan was given to polytheism, many gods, a god around every corner, a god for everything. And so when we get into the biblical text, we keep running into Canaanite deities. We run into them right here because even the name Melchizedek, the name comprises 3 references to deities. The name Malk is the name of a Canaanite god. Tzedek, a Canaanite god. Shalem, Canaanite, a Canaanite reference. Also to a patron god of a city. So you keep running into these names and you don't give it a second thought. Because Abram is God's man. And he would become the father of a great nation, and many nations will be blessed because of him, according to Genesis 12. God promises Abram 3 things: land, descendants, and blessing. And of course, as he journeys into the promised land, which is then called Canaan, land, descendants, and blessing unfolds, in a sense, programmatically, as he takes every step of faith, every place his foot treads on would become part of that land. And so the name Melchizedek is a descriptive name. Let me quote to you very shortly from a quotation in the Anchor Bible Dictionary. And this is by Philip King. And this is what he says about particularly the name, the deity Salem or Shalem, because Melchizedek is a king of Salem. Shalem was the patron of the city. It was a West Semitic god. And the king suggests a long history lies behind Jerusalem. It was the name of a city where the form of the name is probably to be read as Rushalimam. The name appears again in diplomatic correspondence. It appears in the Amanat letters. And it appears in later Assyrian texts as well. The name Jerusalem, he says, is of uncertain etymology, although it is apparently of Western Semitic Canaanite origin. And it is composed of 2 elements. One element means to establish, and the second element means, or a reference to, the Semitic god, right? A Canaanite god. Now, you will often see throughout the Old Testament how descriptors are collapsed into one word, like Melchizedek is the king of righteousness. King and righteousness. The word for righteous in Hebrew would be the word tzedek. We have in Arabic, the Arabic name would be Sadiq, a name given to a Muslim male child, Sadiq. Sadak, as in Neil Sedaka, is a great pianist and a great singer of Jewish extraction. So tzedek, you can hear the pronunciation, you can hear the The name is buried right in there. Tzedakah. The word tzedakah means righteousness. And you've already gathered that I love playing with words and just understanding how words work and where they come from. And so in Psalm 76, verse 2, for example, it says, God's abode has been established in Salem, his dwelling place in Zion. In Psalm 76, verse 2, Salem and Zion are parallel to each other. The one is a reference to the other. Zion refers to Salem, and Salem refers to Zion. But in the book of Genesis, the word Salem is a reference to the same city. But now it's still a pagan city and it's under Canaanite domination. In Psalm 76, verse 2, Salem is parallel to Zion, and that suggests that Salem is to be identified as Jerusalem. So we are working very strongly here with a Canaanite context. And so what do we have to this point? Let's just summarize very briefly. Genesis 14, the king who appears is both a king and a priest. Verse 18 says, he is the king of Salem. He brought out bread and wine. And he was a priest of the Most High God. Watch these two ideas, king and priest. And Jews understand this. Kingdom, priests, because by the time you get to the book of Exodus in chapter 20, where God gives Israel her constitution, his instruction is that Israel would be a kingdom of priests unto God. So they understand the priestly idea, representing man before God through priests. But they also understand the idea of king, because in the book of Genesis, it says, a scepter will rise. A scepter and a crown will rise. There's the kingly element. So king and priest are ideas that were deeply embedded within Hebrew culture. But all I want to emphasize this morning is that the context here in Genesis 14 is a Canaanite context. And this man who appears, Melchizedek, is Canaanite. And everything points to his Canaanite origin. And so as we close out our time this morning, here's your question. What is your name and what does it mean and why was it given to you? Contemplate that and see where it goes. And think about it as we continue to unpack the identity of this very enigmatic character that appears on the scene, and as soon as he appears on the scene, he disappears from the scene and then rocks up again in the Psalms, which we will look at in the next episode, and then in the New Testament. And we're also going to spend some time in the intertestamental period and watch how Jews understood the identity of this king. So I want to thank you for listening this morning. Please join us tomorrow, same time, same place, for the next exciting episode. May God bless you.